Hello, and welcome to LangTime Chat episode 36. Yay! That's David clapping. He's ready. He's excited. Because today we're talking Conlang relays. And this topic was chosen by me because in our Discord server, we've been seeing some chit chat. Not so much like super recently, but like when the LCS, the Language Creation Society, had released that they were going to be opening up, the calls for a current Conlang relay, there was some chatter among some of our Discord patrons about, what is a Conlang relay? Should I participate? What could you expect out of it? So we thought, you know what, why not do a whole podcast episode dedicated to Conlang relays to try to help everyone better understand what they are.
Yeah, I can't wait because I've been a part of the history of conlanging relays for some time. I was not in the first, but I was in the fourth. And I remember the third, I think. Wait, not that one. Hold on a sec. I didn't do the link myself. Unbelievable. Sorry. Anyway, the point is, I think I remember the third. Um, and I'm going to just look at the date to confirm that. Here we go. Pulling this up on archive.org from 2005. Wow, really? It wasn't found as late as 2005? Let's go back to wait. Here we go. Let's go back to 2001.
So what David is doing is that some of the older Conlang relay links no longer are active. Like the page itself is gone. So he's going back into, well, essentially he's in the Wayback Machine, trying to find what the page looked like.
Yeah.
Back in, this is 2001 that he's looking at to be, or sorry, the
So
relay.
this relay ended July 18th, 2000, which would have been before I created my first language. So no, relay number 4 was my very first one. And so I was in the first one that I was available to do. That's interesting.
And so, yeah, that is really cool. Yeah, so some of the older links, though, they don't, if you go to, for instance, the Froth Wiki page about the Conlang relays, you'll see the same thing. If you click on the older Conlang relays, the numbers, it'll just take you to like some GeoCities page and it'll be like not found, essentially.
Well, GeoCities was permanently shut down. Gosh, when was that? I think it was in 2012. It caused quite a stir in the conlanging community as somebody went through and tried to cache all of the GeoCities conlanging pages before GeoCities went down. It was a big deal.
How do we know it's not GeoCities?
The same way that we know it's FrathWiki and not FrothWiki.
Well, GeoCities and Froth Wiki are now my websites. Okay. So anyway, we're going to be breaking down some Conlang relay information. Well, I'll be breaking it down, and then David's going to be giving input.
Yeah, and really, I think it's a very lazy, web host that doesn't go and find the archive.org links for their viewers.
Yeah,
It's
David.
even lazier to just write on there. You can find it on archive. Oh, here we go. I did it. Go here.
Well, let's see if it actually goes here. So this is on David's website where he has.
Look at that.
Okay, so David did provide a link.
Yes, I did.
So David has the older ones linked with a go here for those older relays that again are
Yep. Look at
not.
that. Did it all. Now, as for the Froth Wiki admins, I guess I just can't speak very highly of them.
Frathwiki. Who says Frathwiki? And I'm an ass speaker. Who says Frathwiki?
You're the only person I've ever heard say that. Just like you're the only person I've ever heard say vinyl.
It's not.
No, it's vinyl.
But if it's a record, isn't whatever. You know what? Whatever. We're talking Conlang relays. You just keep tippity tappity typing over on your computer, and I am going to talk about what the basic concept is behind Conlang relays. And David is no longer listening to me, so at some point he's going to pop back in and like repeat what I've already said.
Don't you worry. I was just going to see if I could go here and maybe add some links to the frother.
Anyway, the basic concept
Yes.
of a Conlang relay is that you have some starting participant. And I'm calling this alpha participant because the alpha participant, we're going to break this down in a sort of deeper dive later, and we're going to go into like some more specifics of the roles of these participants. But we're calling this the alpha participant who actually, has this starting text. And then that participant sends a starting text in a conlang to the first regular participant of the conlang relay. And so they send that starter text. They also send some other information about the conlang. We'll break that down more in a bit. But essentially what's happening is they say, hey, here's a text in my conlang. The participant who receives it then translate it into their own conlang. So here we see this as like passing the torch. So you're going to see, we talk about the torch quite a bit. Some lingo that you'll see in Conlang relays. And so, what the participant then does is they translate it into their own Conlang, and they pass that on to the next participant, to participant 2. Participant 2 does the same. They translate it into their own Conlang. And usually they only get about 48 hours per leg here. So usually that's the typical kind of turnaround. You get 48 hours to do this translation work. And then you just keep doing that, right? Like, so every participant has about 48 hours to translate the text they receive into their conlang and to send it to the next participant, however many times. Some conlang relays are relatively small and have, maybe fewer than 10 people. Some conlang relays are actually quite huge, so huge that they end up getting broken into like different rings where it's like you have multiple sets of people doing all this all at the same time. You wouldn't want a conlang relay to get really much larger than kind of, I would say 12 to 15, solely because that 48-hour turnaround, like at some point, you're just organizing something that's going to take way longer than a month to run, and that can be like overwhelming for the person organizing it.
The ideal number of participants is somewhere between 9 and 14, outside of an inverse relay, which we might talk about. If it's fewer than 9, especially if it's like fewer than 7, you don't see a lot of the interesting phenomena, which we'll talk about later. So it's better to have, at least 8 or 9.
Yeah. And you just keep going for however many participants you have. And then whoever the final regular participant is, they send their translated text in their conlang back to the alpha participant. This is why this participant doesn't get a number, because it's like not only are they the starting, they also produce the ending text.
So the alpha is the omega?
It's the alpha and omega. That is correct. The alpha omega. David's pinching his nose.
You could have said omalpha or anything.
But so that participant has both the starting and the ending text. In other words, all of this is done with conlangs, and you get a bit longer, but it's really an expanded version of the game of telephone, where if you ever played that as a kid, you sit in a ring, one person whispers a message and then you just keep trying to whisper that same message that you think you hear to the next person all around the ring until it gets back to the starting person. And then they say what was whispered in their ear. It's the same concept, except longer, because there's the added twist of you're actually translating instead of whispering, because you get the written text and then you have to translate. And so, just like in the game of telephone, the ending text is often quite different than the beginning text. And honestly, the more different it is, it just feels like the more successful the relay was.
Mm-hmm. And this is the case with the Conlang relay too. So, one of the reasons that Jesse thought this would be a good topic is there were some people expressing anxiety about the relay, not knowing if they would be able to be good enough for it or if their Conlang was developed enough for it, stressing that 48 hours wasn't enough time. But like, think about a game of telephone. The point is to have fun. And so by the end of it, yeah, you hope the text is going to the original message is going to be different. If the point was to spread it as faithfully as possible, the game of telephone would be quite different. It wouldn't be whispering. You wouldn't be taking time, and it would be like you would say, "Please, can you say that again? Say it more slowly.
Right.
Tell me each word. Have I got it correct?" And then the person would say, "Yes, you have it correctly. Okay, now I will say it to the other person." That defeats the whole purpose of the game. It's just not as fun. Part of it is that it's quick. So that, of course, especially with a game of telephone, part of the fun about doing it quickly is that you can get the results a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Because, of course, when you're not the one who's either being whispered to or whispering to somebody else, especially after your turn is gone, you're just waiting. And so it's like the quicker you can get through it, then the more fun everybody has, right? And then maybe you can do it again,
Well, and that's also with a Conlang relay why you want to kind of limit the number of participants to a
Right.
certain number, because quite honestly, like once you do your leg, yeah, you're waiting, and not just waiting. You're like waiting for however many 48-hour segments are before or after you. And it's really exciting. Like you want to see, like, how did this end? Did I actually somewhat faithfully translate what I was given? Did I actually figure out what that meant? Like, it's really quite exciting whenever it's all unveiled. But anyway, yeah, so as an example, I wanted to show you some beginning and ending text from my class Conlang relays. That whenever I taught my Conlang class at the university level, what I did at the end of the semester was do a Conlang relay for my students. And so they actually participated in a much smaller version. So they only had, like, I was the alpha participant. And so I started it off with just like, a 2-sentence text. And so they only had like 2 sentences to work with. And then I, of course, worked with every student along the way to make sure that they, had good information. And so with that, I wanted to show you a couple of examples. And just one moment. Okay. The one example is it was the semester I had created the Woktianato language. And so I used my own languages to create these texts, again, as the alpha participant.
It's lovely to hear you pronounce the name of that language. Now it's like I get it. It's really cool.
Oh, thank you. And so the starting text for this little relay was in English, "Do not behave like a fool and endanger yourself. After all, the kruxa," I'll explain that in a moment, "do not distinguish a good person from a bad person." And so in this text, because I was doing this for students, in those 2 sentences, you're going to see, like an imperative form. You're going to see a sentence form. You're going to see things that would force them to use, some sort of like and or connector word. You'll see like some of the elements that I was doing for pedagogical reasons, because I wanted to make sure, how does your language handle, connecting phrases? How does your language handle these sort of, adpositional phrases and so on? So I did that. I also specifically incorporated the word kriksa for my language, which does not actually have an English translation because it was a specific type of animal in the world that I had created. And I explained that in the dictionary entry that, went with the text. But I wanted to see what the students would do, because one of the things I had stressed specifically for my students was, if it doesn't make sense for your language to have a word for it, Don't create a word for it in your language.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, work on phrasing it. Work on finding something that makes sense for your world to deal with that word. And so there is no earthly reason why any of my student languages should have had kriksa in their language. Instead, they needed to come up with, how would I explain this concept in my own Conlang? And so that was the reason that that word was in there specifically.
And that was exactly the same spirit that the original relays started with. And in fact, after a while, like around, I don't know, relay 11 or 12 or something, I think it came up on the Conlang list, or somebody was saying, it's like, oh, I didn't have these words, so I had to coin a whole bunch of new words. And, the elder members were like, no, you weren't supposed to do that. That's not the point. The point is to, you know, translate it and put it as best as you can in your own language. I mean, it's one thing if you don't have a word that you felt like you needed, like, I don't know, put or something.
Right.
But it's like not for that, specifically for something like Triksa. That would be a specific place where you were supposed to do something on your own. By the way, can you pronounce this for us?
Oh, it'll be very slow going.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all essentially it's IPA. Except I did capital letters just to show that was the start of a new sentence for my students' clarity.
Mm.
So, dakneosios satoyokno wode dakne zaskaos leswat ati iano neleziele kruksanu totianat yulotienwe atianat nyehotienwe.
How interesting. Love it.
Okay, thank you. The stress shifts depending on where the root actually is, and it's unpredictable unless you just know all the lexical entries, hence the marking.
What's the grave accent for?
That was like because where essentially this is a compound, the sato yoknut, there's a grave accent followed by an acute accent, and it's because essentially it's a compound and the sato is the secondary word, and so it's supposed to be stressed but just not as strong as the yoknut, and so that's where the bigger stress is, but it's kind of like having two stresses in that word, but it's different from like a predictable secondary stress.
How about that?
And so
right.
anyway, all right, so that's the starting text. Now when it got back to me, this is my ending text in Vuhtianato. And the English translation, so remember the first translation is don't behave like a fool and endanger yourself. After all, the Kruksa do not distinguish a good person from a bad person. The ending is you are able to live without helping other people. After all, the sun goddess is able to turn her back on both servants and leaders.
Wow.
And so you see some of the like messages are still there-ish, but then you can also see it's like completely shifted, right? And so that was a fun one. And so here...
It still makes sense. That's really cool.
It does make sense. And so, but again, like that change is what makes it interesting. Did you want me to read that too? Because I have another one coming up.
We've gotten the flavor of the bird.
Okay.
Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going.
All right. So that's one example.
Mm-hmm.
Another example from a class relay was when I used Gnoma, my little gnome language, for the relay to start it off. And
start with the pronunciation, pretty please.
Oh my goodness. I should be able to speak my Gnome language much better, and yet, bear with me. Yilaradzan yabiadzogon addasta tezenglans naktekwa wailetha. Yuluduwen kastanand lebanauta.
My goodness, it's got kind of the rhythm of Finnish to it.
It's got mainly initial stress, except where otherwise marked.
Mm-hmm. But also like these, geminate, long vowel geminate.
Yeah. It had a lot of that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, and that translates into English as basilisks and wyverns roam the darkest woods at night. You should stay on paths with great light.
And for others who are unfamiliar, sometimes that's also pronounced wyverns.
It sure is.
Yeah.
I like to say Frothwiki and Geosity and Wyvern. But you all, by this point, know my little pronunciation quirks, and you go with it. All right, so that here you can see some of the same things. Again, I had reasons for having a word for basilisk and wyvern, but my goal was that the student I passed this text to would have no reason for those words and would have to figure out what to do in their language. And my students came through, so that's where it started. Where it ended, the kind-spirited creatures used to walk among these rocks, but then the evil wolves burned down their homes. The kind-spirited creatures dug through the bushes, and so now they hide beneath the boulders. Way different. Way, way, way different. Oh, that was a delight. And again, like, I was watching the whole relay unfold because I was working with students at each point. And so, like, I saw exactly where things changed. But you may be wondering, why do these changes happen, especially like some really big changes like that? And there's a lot of reasons, but some of them are pretty predictable, as you may guess, like because there's just natural shifts caused by translations into different languages. Because language A has a word for this, language B doesn't, so then they need to use a different concept to explain the overall feel of what was expressed in language A, and that changes it just enough that when language C gets it, all of a sudden it's a completely different word. And so some of those are just natural shifts caused by translation. Some of it is that as a translator, you may interpret what a string means differently than what somebody else interpreted it to mean. And that happens. So it's just a different sort of individual interpretation. And then, but also like mistakes, they happen. So it may have been like a translation error or a parsing error or I totally thought that was a noun, but it was meant to be a verb error, it happens. But again, the same thing happens in the game of telephone. You mishear someone, and if mistakes don't happen, then the game is no fun.
Yeah. Also, something that last text in particular typified that's quite common is the text often gets longer. It rarely ever gets shorter. And so it's not a surprise that something that started off as, two sentences of relatively average length at the beginning turned into three sentences that was quite a bit more descriptive at the end. That's very, very common.
Yeah. And so that is the really general overview. And now we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into the relay players, if you will. And you've already been introduced to the players that are the participants. We've talked about alpha participant a little bit, and then the rest of the participants, with the alpha participant being the special one who has the beginning and ending duties. But then there's also someone else we haven't spoken about yet, and that's the relay master. And so there's always a relay master assigned for a Conlang relay, and they may or may not be a participant. So they could actually be a participant. If so, they're the alpha participant. If not, then they're organizing. And so I was, for my Conlang relays in my classes, of course, the relay master and also alpha participant. David has been the relay master who has participated. But then I've also been a relay master where I wasn't participating at all. And so I've done that for, I think it was LCC 6 relay. And so I wasn't participating at all. I was just the master. The master. Yes. And so the relay master, like really what they do is they organize the relay. And that includes a lot of different duties. Depending on what the relay is organized like, you may, as a master, actually be in charge of finding the participants. As the relay master, no matter what, you're definitely in charge of keeping track of the participants. You also have to make a schedule, get everybody in when they can actually do it, because, not everybody can take off 48 hours if they have a certain kind of job. They may need their 48-hour window to only be on Wednesdays and Thursdays or whatever. So like you kind of have to make a schedule around what people need. You have to send directions to participants, answer questions that pop up along the way, but also collect all the translations and the torch documents, which we're going to go into more detail about, and publish somehow the results, whether it's online, like putting things online for everybody else to see, whether there's some sort of unveiling event, and that's how I did it in my classes. It was always the last day of the class. I would go through the whole thing and unveil the results. But you somehow publish the results so that way all the participants can see, how it went, and then, other people too who are interested. Anything to add to the Relay Master?
No, because I felt a sneeze coming on, but it's going away.
That's what that face was for. I really was like, God, David is holding something back right now. Like he really wants to talk, but no, he really doesn't want to sneeze. Okay.
I was just sitting here tortured. Oh my God, stop talking. Let me talk. That's,
That sounds about right.
how I am all the time. But yeah, the original for the original relays, the relay master was usually the alpha participant, which incidentally, this is a term that Jesse has invented. It's quite useful.
Yes.
And I find myself wanting to use it now because I never had a term for it. I don't think any of us did. It's just the first person, the first leg. That was what we called it. We called it the leg of the relay. Anyway, the first time that we had a separate relay master from a alpha participant was when somebody just didn't know how to webify the thing. Because that was actually one of the original constraints on running these relays was webifying them. Because this was the first one was in 1999, and the first few were in those early few years. Not everybody had web space and knew how to use HTML and put up a website and do something like that. So it was kind of a big deal. And so only those Conlangers who had those skills and the space were the ones that ran relays for a while.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. And so that's the Relay Master. Now we're going to jump into a little closer look at what the participants themselves do. Again, whether the Relay Master is one of them or not, the participants all have duties. And so we're going to do a deeper dive into our little cycle of what happens in a relay. Starting here with that alpha participant, this participant actually creates the starting text. And so they not only, have a short text written in their Conlang, but like they've created it. Like they made something up to write, whether it's usually for a lot of the bigger relays, it's like a paragraph, kind of a regular size paragraph is what I've normally seen. Nothing like crazy huge, but like also much more than 2 sentences.
There have been poems. There have also there was a recipe.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. There were some really unique texts. There was one where I still don't remember what the original text was, but it was like the first part of it was like a paragraph, and then like there was a paragraph break, and the second part was like a poem or a list. And I don't know if that was the way it was supposed to be. It just ended up that way. It was a strange one.
Nice.
I think it was like 7 or 8.
Nice. I think David's going to look that up as we go on here.
Oh, you betcha.
And so that's the first part of what I'm going to be calling the torch document, is that short text written in the Conlang. The second part, and this is a really important part of the torch document, is that you also send Conlang information. And so here, what that needs to include is a glossary that really only covers what you need for the text that was sent. Like you wouldn't send a 100-page glossary of all the words in the Conlang. Instead, you're going to send like a condensed version where it's like, here's all the words that were used in this text. And then a grammar cheat sheet or a grammar overview to be able to say, like, here's the basic word order, or here are some inflections you may need. again, specific to the text, because it's not, at no point should someone have to read a 35-page document because the next person only has 48 hours. So it's like you're not trying to make it harder for them. You're trying to say, here's all the relevant pieces you're going to need to translate this very specific text that I'm sending you. So this is the torch document. It's got the text in a Conlang, and then it's got, the grammar information and a glossary to go with it that is relevant to that text. Now, along with producing that document, the alpha participant, if they're not the relay master, they need to send that torch document to the relay master so they have that information. But then they also send a second thing, and this only goes to the relay master, a translation of their text into English or whatever the base language is for the relay. Like if it's, if all the participants are using German, and then, they're translating into their conlangs, it'll be like whatever the base language is. I'm just going to, from here on out, use English as the language that I throw out because that's, what I'm using here.
And you specified that translation only goes to the relay master.
Yeah, that is what I just said. It only goes to the relay master.
I could have sworn you said the opposite thing. Sorry.
Wow. Listening.
I was, and I thought I got totally baffled. Sorry. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's even in yellow to call attention. This is only going to the relay master. The torch document will end up going to the participant. But yeah, that English translation, no one else sees it but the relay master at this point. And so then they send that torch document to the first participant. So again, it's got that text in their conlang, the grammar information, and the glossary. And then participant 1 has to translate that text using the information into English. So that way they can see what it's supposed to mean. And then they translate that into their own conlang.
I will say that's optional. Some people skip step 1.
Some people can. I know a lot of people that would be a struggle because the glossary is in English. And
that's
so,
true.
If you're defining words into English, at some point you're still attaching whatever the base language is, in this case English, to the word to be able to translate it into your language.
Yeah, sometimes.
But yeah, if you don't, how you translate it is up to you, whether you have a full English translation of the text or whether you just say, oh, that means horses, and I need horses in mind. So
there is, let me see, I'm just looking ahead. So there is an option, and you know what, maybe I'm going to wait.
I think I know what you're going to say, and I think I will cover that.
All right.
Okay.
Then.
So then participant 1, once they get their own translation of the text into their conlang done, they produce their own torch document. So they're going to have this translated text now that's in their conlang. They're going to then put together the grammatical information of their conlang that's necessary to be able to work with the text. And again, that abbreviated glossary that covers the words used in the text. And so they're going to produce their own torch document. And that torch document will, of course, go to the next participant. But they also need to send information to the relay master. So they're going to send that torch document to the relay master. But then they're also going to send a translation of their text into English to the relay master. And optionally, they can even send a translation of the text they received just to show what their understanding was of what they got.
And sometimes that can help understand where changes were made, and can actually be very useful for the conlanger in the previous step.
Yeah.
So in other words, if there was, sometimes it's changes occur because the words weren't the same or because it was a choice of translation. Sometimes changes occur because there was a crucial mistake made in glossing, or a word was left out. It happens, and the person didn't ask or didn't notice. And sometimes they just didn't understand maybe an interlinear gloss or something at all. And so when you produce your understanding of what the previous text was, it can help to elucidate that at the end.
And so, this process is what continues for each participant in the relay, where those torch documents are passed among the participants. And again, only the relay master has access to the translations of those texts into the base language, into English in this case. And so only the relay master has access to those during the actual relay. So that is my overview. Now, ready for an example?
All right.
Dun, da, da, da. Example relay. I had to do my little announcer.
I like it. I'm always a fan of it.
So we're going to talk about the LCC5 relay because that's the one where David was the alpha participant and I was the next participant. And this was my introduction to David. This was before I actually met him.
And was this your first Conlang relay?
It was my very first Conlang relay.
Were you even familiar with the concept beforehand?
No.
Wow. And
so I was very excited. And I was very nervous when I found out I was going after you. Like, holy cow. So at the bottom of this slide, if you're following along visually, there is a link where you can see the images I've pulled. But because we are in sort of a recording of Keynote, I don't think links will actually be able to show up. And I don't want to test that out. And so I've taken images from this link, but you can go look at, the full thing on your own, and I can include the link too. But gosh, I really hope now that I say all of that to be like, hey, if you're following along visually, I hope I explained all of my little handy dandy visual layouts well enough in words that people only listening can follow along.
Well, I think you did.
I sure hope so. If I didn't, I am sorry. Okay. Apology done. We're moving on. We're forging on. All right. So we're going to talk about that LCC5 relay. An overview of that relay. I already mentioned that David was the starting and the ending. So if you're looking at this little screenshot, which lists all the participants, you'll notice that David is listed twice as participant number 1 and 13. So there were 12 people involved. David is the beginning and end. And then in between, we've got just a stellar list of conlangers that included, Sally Caves and John Clifford and John Chiara, Jeff Jones, so on. So it's like we've got like all these people, in between. So it was one heck of a relay, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Languages being represented, everything from, Dothraki and Tokipona to lesser known ones like my Hiutsath, which was completely unknown as of this relay.
Yeah.
And you're...
Yazambin is in there. And then, Jeff Jones used TIAL. And then Unnels is in there. I have no idea how Tony Harris dealt with that. That's really interesting. That must be one of the more unique Conlang relay entries that's ever been. Very cool.
Unfortunately, that wasn't one I pulled to look at because I was only doing a sampling. And so, of course, I did our beginning sampling.
Well, when you're explaining what a relay is, you don't want to use that.
But if you go to the link and want to actually explore and look at every single text, you'll see... essentially, you'll see what the torch documents were with the addition of the English translations, which were not in the documents passed along, of course. And so another thing you're going to see is that, as mentioned, a 48-hour turnaround is very normal. And so you'll see that these are all done in 2-day increments where it's like text received on Monday, March 11th, text sent to the next participant on Wednesday, March 13th, and then so on and so forth. So you'll see it's all done in a 48-hour thing. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's all there. Let's talk about the torch document I received from David. So this is what it included. It included a text in Dothraki.
That's really long.
It's a paragraph.
Yeah, it's a good-sized paragraph. That's not a large font, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines plus a little bit extra.
Do you want to do us a little treat and read like maybe the first sentence or two?
Yeah, I'd read you the whole thing, but it's just so long. So, jadian jayaliani. الشيخ يربني باي روحوجو سوريس يري ما دوثري يومي كزاجون was my hatifat hizari hieri was man havajak yeran jin jili. There's some of it.
You have a very specific Dothraki voice, and I love it.
That's,
Okay.
That's my generic one. I also have a separate one for Amelia Clark and Jason Momoa, and also for my lower ranked Dothraki as well.
Nice, nice. All right, so I received this text, which David read the beginning of. It's all written in Dothraki completely, just, written out. Of course, another important thing is that you'll notice that these are all going to be romanizations. Like, even if you have an orthography for your language, you're trying to make it as easy as possible for the next participant so they don't have to decode and figure out how to read the orthography and everything. Okay, so along with that text, I also received an overview of the grammar.
This is a little bit lazy because this will happen with people whose languages are pretty well documented online. For the most part, I just put up a link.
You did put up, so it started like the grammar description was honestly like, hey, here's a website about it, and then here's the fan wiki, which is, as he even says, better source. But all the information I actually needed was typed below it.
Oh.
And so
Well, that's nice.
I didn't actually need those websites to do the translation. And so like the very important pieces that need to be sent in this torch document include things like what's the word order, is it prepositional, postpositional? So it's like that basic typological overview to help orient the person. And then verb information, like the infinitive form has this, then you get the verb stem. So it's like, it's really just walking through like, how are these inflections done if that's necessary for being able to translate the text? What kinds of suffixes or prefixes or, other ways of marking inflections are you going to see, auxiliaries, whatever. These are the kinds of information that people need to be able to translate.
Yeah, and like another thing in here is that it's supposed to be shorter. This is supposed to be a shorter task. So it's like you don't need the full grammar. You need the grammar that's relevant for the translation. So for example, like I have a note here, there is no copula in Dothraki. If you have X nominative, Y nominative, it means X is Y. There is a way to express copular constructions in the future and in the past tense that involve other cases. But this text doesn't use any of that. And so basically that would just be extraneous information and wouldn't be super helpful. I mean, you don't want to be like, you don't want to be saying like, this is the translation of sentence 1, this is the translation of sentence 2. But it's like, it's supposed to be a little bit challenging, but it's not supposed to be like, well, I have to read this entire 200-page grammar to figure out what the heck is relevant,
And you'll even, like, if you happen to be looking at the slide, one thing you'll notice is that the screenshot cuts off the grammatical information because I was just getting, like the beginning part of it. But another thing you'll see is like in the little paragraph about verbs, it specifically says like only 2 of these particular suffixes are encountered in this text. The first person singular ak and the second person singular e. Not introduced at all to any of the other forms because they're not actually in, that's right here.
Yeah.
They're not actually in the text. So it's again limiting how much information you give to the next person.
Furthermore, this is simplifying things a little bit because the suffix e is associated with the second person singular, also with the second person plural and the third person plural. But it's like, you don't need that for this. And so the simplification was okay because there was going to be enough that was difficult enough. Yeah. And the text, especially the text, was longer. You might make it a little bit more cryptic if it was just like one sentence that was of medium length.
Yeah.
But it was going to be enough just to get through the whole thing in 48 hours.
And then, so along with that grammar information, which is partially screenshotted here, there is also a lexicon included. And again, this lexicon or this glossary is condensed. Only the words that actually show up in the text are here. And really, for the most part, it's really like the relevant translation. So, like, if there was a completely separate translation where, for instance, our word in sarkeje, which means to be blind but also to be cute, like you would choose the more appropriate one to send along. Some of them have multiple translations.
Yeah.
But also, like, there's some that are like kind of phrasal and you give the full phrase so that way you don't have to figure out what the phrase is and so on.
Yeah, like for the most part, it was like I knew what was going to be difficult in this text. And so for the parts that weren't difficult, I didn't want to introduce any unnecessary complications, especially since mine was the very first text. You shouldn't be seeing like a huge change in the translation from text one to text two.
Yeah.
There can be changes, big changes that happen between two texts, but it's not as much fun if it happens in the first two texts. Typically, the first one should give that person enough to be able to do something that's like 99% accurate, 98% accurate, maybe 95.
And so again, the screenshot I'm showing here is a partial entry, which you'll see I specifically cut it off after the word goat because goat is very important. Dorfi.
Dorfi.
And so, yeah, it's just a glossary like adra, turtle, ajin, now, and now. And so it's really to the point.
I always loved that word for turtle. I thought it was very nice. Adra.
I like it too.
Yeah.
All right, so that's what I received as the next participant. And so then I translated that Dothraki text based on that information, and I put it into my own Conlang Hiutsath. And so the torch document I then sent on to the next participant included, of course, my Hiutsath text. And so I'm gonna attempt to this one I'm really bad at. This is meant to be
voiceless.
If you've heard me talk about this language in the past, it's like a whisper language, so everything's supposed to be voiceless. Lashetaiso Pathinesu is the title. Chefilothnesu Sechoma Lethelune Thechosu Lofath Nesau Hachtanema Thesasu Neshilesau Nethilesauash. There's also a lot of vowels. Festa amosngehath esisola. Okay, that's enough.
I thought that the vowels were supposed to be voiceless too.
They are, but like yes, exactly. But I wanted them to be able to hear me. And so anyway, it's really like it's meant to be whispered language. Okay. So that was my text. And in fact, as you had mentioned, like what I translated from your text was actually spot on, if I must say so myself. Some of the little changes that had to be made were like, I didn't have word for carrot or plum, which shows up in here. Anyway. And so I think carrots do. Maybe it was just plums that show up. Anyway. And then the grammatical information I sent along just included, again, some typological facts. I did include like some basic speaker facts, like a 2-sentence thing. Including things like, my speakers look human, but they live separately, and there are gaps in their vocabulary for things that most human languages have words for. And so when there is a gap, they usually describe what the word is through adjectives and relative clauses. And so, yeah, just a basic overview. And then, for instance, I did charts here just to make it like, boom, here are some suffixes you're going to encounter. Not all of them. It's just here are the ones that are actually in the text and so on. And then, of course, a little lexicon, so that way they could translate it. So this process went through 10 more relay legs, and then it got back to, I hit next. There we go. Then it got back to David, the alpha participant.
I believe you said it. I was the Alpha Mega. Is that it?
Alpha Mega.
Okay. The Alpha Omega?
Is that what I said? Alpha Omega. Okay, so it got back to David, and so he then produced a final text in Dothraki, this is one of the rare occasions where the ending text is shorter.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, it's 3 paragraphs now.
It's 3 paragraphs, but like, here, let me pull up on screen the actual amount of text. And the English translations you're going to see are really this one's quite shorter than what the initial one was.
Hold on a sec. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so this is 7 and a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. And then you put that there, and then that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my.
It's like really only 6 lines.
My goodness. I blame Unnels.
And so here, but there was also Ithquil in there.
Oh my.
Which, this was a challenging relay. Which the title itself, like just so that way you can hear how different they are, we've got Gilles Ave Son versus Ave Aren Anni. Like, completely different.
Gilles Ave Son and then Ave Aren Anni.
Yeah. Obviously different. And so obviously Dothraki is different, but let's talk about the English translations. This is how it started.
Okay.
And so I'm going to read this in English.
Oh, you're going to read it?
I'm going to read it, and then you're going to read the final text in English.
Oh, okay. Well, you have to give this the gravitas that I invested into this text. It was very important.
Do you want to do this one then, and I'll do the ending one?
I think that makes more sense.
Okay, so David's going to read how it started.
This text is entitled Advice from Father. That would, by the way, sometimes the relay was given a title, sometimes it was not. This one was Advice from Father. Approach me, my child. Today you will leave your family behind and ride beyond the mountains. Before your departure, though, I will give you this advice. Don't trust a man who speaks with turtles. Turtles cannot be burned, and so they will frighten your horses. Eat carrots during the full moon only. The moon will strengthen the carrot, and so you will be strengthened. Finally, never touch a plum tree. The plum tree is your enemy. A plum tree will disrespect you, your mount, and your ancestors. All plum trees are completely evil. I will hunt you down and murder you if you even look at a plum tree. I give you my word, my child. I will lay you low. Do not touch a plum tree. Plums, however, are sweet. You should eat plums, dried plums too. They're great. Now ride, my child. Ride and scream like a goat.
Indeed. Okay, so that was how it started. And then the next one I've titled How It's Going. Mm-hmm. And so this is the ending. The title is now My Good Father. And here's the text. My good father said to me, I want you to mount a mountain unicorn and inspect the deer. So I mounted a unicorn and left. While I was traveling, I met a tribe that had many unicorns, and they showed me some sweet fruit they had found. They told me about a great lion on the mountain, and they were afraid that it would be able to injure me. I feared that I wouldn't be able to get to the deer in time. I rode throughout the night, and by the light of the moon, I saw a place where the sweet fruit was growing. When we reached the deer, it was healthy and gave birth.
I don't remember that at all.
Okay, so obviously there were some changes there. Obviously. Even with those changes, though, you can actually unpack similarities across the text among what, quite frankly, looks like chaos whenever you see the beginning and the end text side by side. And so here they are, side by side, beginning and text, what we just read, 2 sides of the screen. And I'm going to unpack some similarities here.
All right.
This is always a fun part. And so first and foremost, we've got advice from father, we've got my good father. So that idea of father speaking to child has obviously like carried over throughout all the legs of the relay. And so you definitely have that. You've also got like this idea that it's not just a father speaking to a child, but it's something about like, because if you're getting advice from your father, you've got this opening line in the beginning text, approach me, my child. That shifted, and yet the idea is still there where you have this, my good father said to me, where it's like, because, what is advice if not a father trying to be good and saying something to their child. And so it's like, it's not completely equal, but like you totally get that this is the spirit of it is there, which is why it's all in italics. The spirit is there. Father is just straight up match. All right. So in the initial text, there's something about riding, right? Like you're gonna go ride beyond the mountains. Specifically, a horse is mentioned later. And so that same concept is carried over into the final text with, I want you to mount. So it's like, it's still, you're writing something. It's just what you're writing has changed quite a bit. A horse to a mountain unicorn. I love it. But that idea of mountain was there in the original text. It's just ride beyond the mountains suddenly became a mountain unicorn.
How on earth did that happen? This mountain unicorn. Who introduced the unicorn? I know it wasn't Ithgoil.
We'll have to like unpack it step by step. I'm just unpacking the beginning to the end.
It wasn't you, right? You didn't introduce the unicorn, did you?
No.
Okay. All right.
All right. There's also this in the initial text we have before your departure. And in the final text we said, it's so I mounted a unicorn and left. And so there's this idea that like you're leaving and going and doing something. In the initial text, we never actually find out what you're doing. You're just going to depart. In the end text, the difference there is that we totally find out about your journey after you leave. In the initial text, we've got that eat carrots during the full moon only. The eating carrots totally got lost, but the full moon stuck around. It showed up later in the text because we've got by the light of the moon. So it like somehow got shifted among the translations, but the fact that the moon stuck around and that if you have a full moon, it's probably pretty bright. And so it's like you've got that same idea completely translates just in a very different way.
And the turtles are gone. I will tell you, sometimes the way a relay text gets shorter is, with 48 hours, sometimes you're careless and you like literally miss a sentence. That's happened. Where it's like, what happened to this concept? And you look and then you go find this one person and it's just like, oh my God, I missed that. Or like they translated it but forgot to paste it into the email for the next person. I wonder if that happened here. Anyway.
I do come back to them at the end.
Got it.
Next up, we've got a plum tree. Because, the father's saying never touch a plum tree. We don't hear about not touching plum trees in the final text, but what we do hear is that specifically there's a place where the sweet fruit was growing. And what is that if not a tree of fruit? And so it's like you have that concept carried over. And then you've got, again, this one is in italics because it's more of a spirit is there, where in the first text, the father is really murderer-y and is like, I'm going to hunt you down if you touch this plum tree. And the spirit of being worried about being injured is in the final text with, this great lion on the mountain that, this person was worried that it would be able to injure me. And so you've got that same idea that some danger is involved. It's just who's doing the injuring has completely shifted. Right? We also, in the first text, have mention of plums specifically. And in the final text, we've got sweet fruit. And plums are indeed sweet fruit. Again, they show up sort of in different areas because plums, like we're talking about the plum tree in the first text. It's not until after that you actually get the fruit itself mentioned. And in the final text, the sweet fruit is like right up there at the top. And so it's, again, different order. So something happened with the way these were ordered differently. And then we've also got this ending, this like ride and scream like a goat. And what does that suggest? But health and vitality, right? If you're riding and screaming like a goat, you are healthy. And what do you know? That deer was healthy too. And so, again, the spirit was there. There was spirit. And in both texts, two different animals are specifically mentioned, turtles and horses in the first. We've got unicorn, deer. I don't know where the lion came from, quite frankly. But we do have two different animals are mentioned. It's just like, oh yeah, the goat is down here. Maybe
And
the
then there's
goat.
a third animal, a lion. There's three animals
Oh
in
my
both
gosh,
of these texts.
I should have done that one too. I forgot about that. So yeah, both texts specifically mention three different animals: turtles, horses, goat in the first one, and then in the final text we've got unicorn, deer, and lion. And so it's like you've got these elements where it's like, okay, I can see that. Obviously, the other stuff like really shifted in between.
These are very American animals in the initial text, and then we switched to British animals in the last.
Those unicorns are very British, and those lions, I hear the British lions are fierce
You know about the lion and the unicorn?
in the wardrobe.
No. It was talked about in Lewis Carroll, but they're stand-ins for political parties.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now I do. Thank you for educating me. All right, so that's a little unpacking of that. And again,
It's very cool.
the more it changes, the funnier the results are. And so some takeaways that we hope you get from this information is that Conlang relays give you a chance to dive into other Conlangs because you're getting, something else. And a lot of times it's maybe a language you've never worked with, never heard of. And that's really exciting. You get to like dive into like, well, what kind of grammatical things do they have? What kinds of words do they have? How did they translate this? And so it's like you've got this really amazing opportunity to just like really dive into someone else's work. And also it's a great chance to actually expand your own because like David had said, maybe you're translating something and you realize like, I don't have a verb for this and I really should. Like maybe it's like to send or like to sit and you're like, oh my gosh, how do I not have a word for this? It gives you a chance to like create the kind of vocabulary that you need. And it also really works in those instances where you just wouldn't have a word for that concept. It really, really works those creative muscles of like, how else can I say this? Because you still want that spirit there. You still want the idea there that is in the text you received. But it's like, but how would I make this make sense for my speakers and make it work? And so that's, I think, very exciting. That was one takeaway. And I hope the other takeaway was that Conlang relays are fun. And they're meant to be fun. Like David had said, like, it's like nobody is looking at the end of the day like to point fingers where things went wrong. Instead, it's like delightful twists where it's like, oh my God, how did this happen? And it's so exciting.
Yeah, it's a very different thing from like, for example, the something else we used to do in the Conlang list, which is translating the Babel text, where it was taken much more seriously. This is the introduction of your Conlang. People ask about choices, ask questions about, ways you translated. And, it might actually reveal, maybe a mistake that you made or something like that, or something that you'd need to think about. That was much more serious. This was always just for fun. The first Conlang relay was in the summer of 1999. It was done by Irina Rempt, who came up with this poem called The Starling Song. And people just thought it was fun, and they had such a good time with it. That's why that like this, I want you to imagine, this was the summer of 1999, right? And we know that a relay leg is 48 hours. So if you've got like 9 participants, right, that's like a month, like a more than a half a month, right? And with more, it's even longer. And yet my first Conlang relay was relay 4, which was like a year later. there had already been 3 Conlang relays by that point because they were just too much fun. And then, like, holy smoke, like, when was uh, like Conlang Relay 10 was in 2004.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So like we really got on a good kick there. Things kind of slowed down after Relay 10. Um, and I think it started with Relay 12 because that was the idea. It was Jeffrey Henning's idea. He wanted to do this thing called a scheduleless relay, where it was just like you just put the text up, and he had a way of webifying it so that you'd only get whatever text was up there, and it was just like anybody could do it at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And it just died because that wasn't it just wasn't as much fun. Anyway, and so we kept it up a little bit. I picked it up again by starting the LCC relay for LCC2. That kept going, but yeah, it was a good bit of fun. Anyway, so uh, I'm glad that it's been fun for conlangers throughout, and I think it's a fun idea to kind of introduce a new generation to it, see what they do with it.
Yeah.
It's gone through several iterations. Like one of the more interesting ones was the inverse Conlang relay, which had there were only 2 of them, and it had a very small number of participants. And there were requirements for your language because in a regular Conlang relay, you get a text, you translate it into your Conlang, and you pass it on with notes. In an inverse relay, you received a text that had been written in your own language by somebody else,
Oh my gosh.
and then you decoded it and translated it into somebody else's language that you had been studying for at least a month.
Wow.
And so, like, for example, I think it was Amanda Babcock Furrow who did Kamakawi. And so I received a text written in Kamakawi by Amanda Babcock Furrow. And she even created a word that I kept in there using a very obscure and frozen lexicalization strategy. I'm sorry, derivational strategy, where it's like it became clearer when I finally figured out what she had done. It's like, man, you really read this document. You read the whole thing, and I thought it was very cool. And I think I used what did I use? Oh man, are they anywhere? Anyway, so whatever.
Wait, scroll down. First inverse relay. Go up. Up. There's the second. The first one is above it a little bit.
Oh yeah.
There you go.
Let's see where it is. Oh, it's on Jim Henry's website. Oh, that's nice. That's right. I used Yazambin. And then, I'm sorry, I said Amanda Babcock for us. This is so embarrassing. It was Arthi Angassi. How could I? I'm so sorry, Arthi. Arthi used Kamakawi. And so there were only 5 people that did this. Right? Second inverse relay, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's actually a number. Huh. How about that? And yeah, Arthi did it again. And then I used Kalen. That's right. Tried my best. It was difficult. Anyway, and then so like there have been a couple others. There was one on Tumblr. They did a couple on the ZBB. I should be going over here for this, right? Not there, here. Yeah, that's right. There were a couple of. There was like the conlingual telephone. That was the ZBB. Oh, that's right. The Conculture relay. That was a unique one. That happened. Anyway, there's been all sorts of types of iterations on this, and then of course there were there were Jesse's relays for your class.
Mm-hmm.
Did you webify those many chance?
No, because it's student work, and I didn't feel comfortable sharing student
Oh,
work
that's
online without their
right. You'd have to
permission.
ask their permission,
Yeah.
and that's a pain in the butt.
Which is
That's
also
right.
why I only showed my beginning and ending texts from those as examples, because
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
mine, and yeah, I didn't want to.
Yeah. No, that's a sticky wicket there. But anyway, yeah. So the thing is, it's a fun idea, and it's a kind of a fun, lightweight thing to do with your language. Lightweight, not in the sense that it's not difficult, but that it's not so serious
Mm-hmm.
if you like make a mistake or do something or have to invent some kind of coinage. It's the type of thing where it's like if you think about a language like Dothraki or High Valyrian, they're not going to have words for modern things like telephones or airplanes, and you'd never even come up with a coinage for that you would seriously consider a part of the language. But if it were a part of a relay where there happen to be airplanes in this thing, yeah, it's not a big deal. You just come up with something for it just to pass it along, and then you see what people do with like a metal bird lizard.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Anyway,
good times.
yeah.
But yes, so hopefully this was really informative for you. And if you were on the fence about whether you would participate in a Conlang relay, I hope this is just help you better inform your decision, whether you decide to or not. Still totally up to you, obviously, but hopefully this kind of gives you a better glimpse at what it is and the sort of level of expectation in terms of, I think the biggest expectation is that you will produce a torch document to send to the next participant. I think that's the biggest, because if you
Yeah.
don't complete your link, then obviously like the relay master has to kind of work around that and
They
get
have
the
to- they
information
have to
to
skip
somebody
you.
else. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. And the second most important thing is making sure that the correct emails go to the correct person.
Yeah, that you don't accidentally send the English translation to
Double
the
and
next
triple check.
person. Yeah, you really got to make sure that only goes to the relay master, because otherwise, whoops.
Mm-hmm.
Whoops. All right. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this. We had fun talking about it, had fun reliving memories of the Conlang relay that we participated in. And yeah, and I also hope you have a great start to February.
Mm-hmm.
So stay grammar and see you in the next stream.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.